on the card reading, Dad's 50th birthday celebration. The golden script was a stark contrast to the bitterness in her chest. 473 kilometers. That was how far she would have to drive, a distance that, in more ways than one, felt insurmountable. For years, her relationship with her father had been fractured. He had always played favorites, and for as long as Lily could remember, she had never been the one to receive his praise or approval. He had always made her feel like she was the afterthought, the one who had to work twice as hard to earn half the recognition. Yet, despite it all, the invitation still lay there, waiting for her decision. Her brother, the golden child, was the one who had always received the most attention. He was the one who could do no wrong. Lily had grown up watching her father shower him with praise, as if he were the only one worth his time. And yet here she was, holding an invitation to her father's birthday, asking her to celebrate his milestone, a celebration where she had always felt like an outsider. She paused for a moment, the weight of her emotions pulling her in two different directions. On one hand, there was resentment, so much of it built up over years of neglect and favoritism. It burned inside her, a constant reminder of all the times she had been overlooked in favor of her brother. It was almost laughable how much she had sacrificed for a family that seemed to take her for granted. And then there was hope. A part of Lily still clung to the idea that maybe, just maybe, this birthday could be different. Maybe her father had finally realized how much she had done for the family. Maybe this was her chance to show up and make him proud, something she had never gotten before. With a sigh, Lily stood up, grabbing her coat and keys. The drive would be long, but she wasn't about to let her father think she would never show up. For all the pain they'd caused her, she would go. After all, family was family. Or so she tried to convince herself. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was determined to face whatever awaited her at the end. As Lily drove through the winding roads, her mind drifted back to her childhood, a time that seemed both distant and painfully vivid. The house, with its familiar smell of baked bread and the creak of the old wooden stairs, was the setting of her early memories. But it wasn't the house that defined her upbringing, it was the atmosphere inside it. An invisible, ever-present weight, one that pushed her to always prove herself, while her brother effortlessly cruised through life with an unearned sense of entitlement. Her father had always adored him. Alex, the golden child, with his boyish charm and innocent smile. He could do no wrong in their father's eyes. When he failed a test, it was brushed off with a laugh and a pat on the back. "You'll do better next time," their father would say. When he broke something, it was just an accident. If he disappointed anyone, it was always someone else's fault. The world seemed to revolve around him, and Lily? Well, she was just there, quiet, doing her part, trying to fit into a mold that was never made for her. Her hard work went unnoticed. All the late nights spent studying, the extra chores she took on, the sacrifices she made so her brother could have more freedom, they were invisible to her father. She never got the well done or the "I'm proud of you" that Alex seemed to receive effortlessly. Instead, she was always told to keep going or just try harder. Her accomplishments, whether academic or personal, were always overshadowed by Alex's failures, which somehow didn't matter as much. It was as though the praise was reserved exclusively for him, and all Lily could do was watch. She remembered one particular moment that crystallized her role in the family. It was her high school graduation. She had worked so hard for it, studying late into the night, taking extra classes to make sure she could succeed. When the day arrived, she had hoped to hear those words from her father that she had longed for. "I'm proud of you." But when she looked to him, hoping for recognition, he was more focused on Alex, who was joking around with his friends. Lily's heart sank as she realized that despite everything she had done, despite how much she had pushed herself, she was just another person in the background. Meanwhile, Alex had struggled. He was rebellious, skipping classes, staying out late, and getting into trouble. Yet, no matter what he did, it was always excused, always brushed under the rug. "He's just being a teenager," their father would say, a knowing smile on his face. But Lily? Lily was expected to be the perfect daughter, the one who never made mistakes. Her imperfections were met with disappointment, while Alex's were met with understanding. The more Lily tried to earn her father's approval, the more she realized it was a game she could never win. He had already made up his mind. He was proud of Alex, and no matter how hard she tried, she would always be the one who had to work twice as hard to get half the recognition. It was moments like these that had built up the bitterness in her heart. But even more than that, it had set the foundation for the deep emotional conflict she felt now. Lily wasn't just resentful of her father's favoritism. She was devastated by it. The dining room was filled with the rich scent of roasted meat and the hum of polite conversation. Family and friends gathered around the table, laughing and sharing stories of years gone by. But Lily felt as though she were in another world, separate, detached from the warmth and camaraderie of those around her. Her eyes flickered to her father, sitting at the head of the table, a smile plastered on his face as he greeted everyone with exaggerated enthusiasm. She had traveled 473 kilometers to be there, but right now, it didn't feel like the home she remembered. The walls, once familiar and safe, now seemed cold and distant. Alex, her brother, was laughing with their cousins, making jokes, as usual, his carefree nature earning him all the attention. Her parents exchanged glances with one another, smiles never wavering, as though everything was perfect. Lily, however, couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. She was there because she thought, no, hoped, that this birthday dinner could be a turning point. She had hoped her father's words would be different this time. Maybe, just maybe, he would say something about her hard work, about her effort to be there despite everything. But deep down, she knew that wasn't going to happen. As the dinner continued, her father stood up to make a toast, his glass raised high. The room fell silent in anticipation. Lily's heart fluttered nervously as she braced herself for the familiar words. "I'm proud of all my children," he began, his voice steady and warm. Lily smiled faintly, her stomach tightening with a mixture of hope and doubt. Maybe this time, this would be the moment. Maybe he'd finally acknowledge her. But then, as the silence stretched on, her father's words took a sharp turn. "Except for one," he continued, his voice casual, as at her, and for a brief second their eyes locked. The air seemed to crackle with tension. The weight of his words settled heavily in her chest. Except for one. Those words stung like a slap in the face. The laughter around the table continued, but to Lily it felt like a distant echo, far away from the crushing reality of what had just been said. Her heart pounded in her ears, but she didn't dare react. She could feel her mother's eyes on her, a look of pity mingled with guilt flashing briefly before she quickly turned her gaze away. Lily wanted to disappear. She wanted to walk out of the room, to leave and never come back. But she didn't. She stayed. She stood there, clutching her glass in trembling fingers, and smiled, a smile so forced it hurt her face. Inside, her emotions raged. Every ounce of resentment she had been holding back boiled over, but she kept it locked inside. Why did he do this? Why now? She had hoped for a sign of acknowledgement, a simple acknowledgement that she mattered. But instead, she had been reduced to nothing more than an afterthought, a mistake he wasn't willing to own. She forced herself to sip her champagne, trying to swallow the bitterness that had risen in her throat. She laughed, but it wasn't a laugh, it was hollow, empty. The irony of it all didn't escape her. Her father was proud of every child at the table except her. She had given up so much for this family, but none of it had ever been enough. Her father's toast hung in the air, and Lily's eyes flickered to Alex, who had no idea what his words had done to her. He was too caught up in his own world to notice. But Lily wasn't a child anymore, not someone who would silently absorb the hurt. And as the awkward silence stretched on, she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. The laughter around her felt deafening. Each chuckle, each world she had hoped she could re-enter. The clinking of glasses, the hum of casual conversation, it all faded into a blur as her father's words echoed in her mind. Except for one. That single phrase seemed to reverberate in her head, drowning out everything else. She looked at her father, sitting at the head of the table, his face flushed from the alcohol, his smile wide and carefree as though nothing had happened. And there he was, her brother, Alex, basking in the glow of their father's approval. He was busy telling some ridiculous story, making everyone laugh. and she couldn't help but feel disgusted by the ease with which he played the part of the golden child. But it wasn't Alex who hurt her the most. It was her father, the man who had promised her the world, who had promised that family came first, that love was unconditional. And yet, time and time again, he had chosen Alex. He had chosen his mistakes, his laziness, his entitlement over Emily's hard work, over her sacrifices, over everything she had given up for them. The years of overlooked achievements, the countless times she had been expected to drop everything for the family, all came rushing back. Every time she had been pushed aside for Alex. Every time she had been told to make way for him. The clarity hit her like a slap in the face. This will never change. Her father would never see her. Not truly. She could work herself to the bone, achieve every goal she set, and it would never be enough. He would always look at her like she was a disappointment, while Alex, no matter how many times he messed up, would always be the favorite. It was as though her worth was measured by how much she could sacrifice, how much she could endure, and how much she could give without ever asking for anything in return. In that moment, something inside Emily snapped. The little girl who had once desperately tried to earn her father's love, who had worked tirelessly to be seen, was gone. The woman sitting at that table was different. She was no longer willing to beg for scraps of love and attention. No longer willing to be the invisible daughter. A fire started to burn within her, a quiet but fierce rebellion. Emily had spent years trying to please them, trying to fit into a mold that never truly fit her. And yet, they had never truly seen her. No, it was time for her to see herself. As her father continued to boast about his perfect family, Emily felt the first real spark of freedom. Revenge wasn't about anger. It wasn't about shouting, about confronting her father in the heat of the moment. No, this was different. It was about taking control of her own life, about putting herself first for the very first time. She glanced at her father again, but this time she saw him for what he really was, a man who couldn't see beyond his own narrow view of what mattered. She saw him as the source of her pain, yes, but also as the catalyst for the change she was about to make. It was time to stop being the invisible daughter. It was time for Emily to take back what was hers, to show them just how much they had underestimated her. The pieces were falling into place. Slowly but surely, she knew exactly what she had to do. And when the moment came, she would show them the cost of overlooking her. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of revenge. It was about reclaiming her power. The dinner had continued, but the energy in the room had shifted. The laughter was still there, the clinking of glasses, the chatter, but it all felt distant, muted. Emily's mind, however, was sharp and focused, locked on what she was about to do. Her hands felt steady as she reached into her bag and carefully retrieved a small gift box. It wasn't much, just a simple, unassuming little box wrapped in soft, plain paper. But it would hold everything she needed. This wasn't about grandeur or making a scene. It wasn't about grandeur. No, it was about making a statement, one small action that would speak volumes. A quiet rebellion. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained a mask of composure. She could feel her pulse in her throat, a tightness in her chest. The room seemed to hold its breath, though no one knew what was coming. Her fingers traced the edges of the box, feeling the weight of her own resolve. It wasn't a long wait before her father raised his glass for another toast. His smug grin was back, his eyes scanning the room, watching his family with pride as he prepared to make another grand declaration. "To family," he said, his voice rich and full of meaning. "To everything I've worked for. And to my children, the ones who make me proud." His eyes lingered on Alex for a moment, a smile creeping across his face. "Except for one," he added with a careless laugh. Emily could feel her breath catch, the familiar sting of his words, but she didn't flinch. She didn't even allow herself to feel the anger anymore. That part of her had already burned away. Instead, she smiled. The smile was not for her father, but for the moment that was about to unfold. Her hand moved slowly, almost too slowly, but her fingers didn't tremble as she dropped the small gift box into her father's champagne glass. It made no noise as it sank, only the tiniest of splashes, barely noticeable beneath the bubbly surface. No one saw it happen, at least not yet. They were too distracted by the moment, by the routine of the celebration. But Emily knew the attention would soon turn to her. She sat back in her chair, her calm expression at odds with the chaos that swirled within her. The cocktail of emotions, anger, betrayal, anticipation, now formed a quiet resolve. She would let them wonder, let them feel the tension mount. The room was filled with the chatter of polite conversations, but Emily's mind was already far ahead. She could see the moment when everything would come crashing down. It wasn't about the gift box. It wasn't about the contents inside either. No, it was about what this small gesture represented. The tiny box, dropped without a sound, was a symbol of everything she had been denied. It was a symbol of the years she had spent working, sacrificing, bending to the will of a family who had never truly seen her. Now, she was choosing to make them see. And as her father lifted the glass to take a sip, Emily felt a rush of satisfaction. The storm within her had been building, and now it was about to break. This wasn't just a gift, it was a reckoning. The dinner had taken on a strange, almost surreal quality. Emily's mind raced, but her body remained composed, every inch of her cool as the others continued their small talk. Her father had yet to notice the small gift box floating in his glass, so wrapped up in his smug little toast that he couldn't have cared less about the tiny detail. Then it happened. He raised his glass to his lips, the delicate crystal glinting under the chandelier light. The conversation around the table ebbed, but his eyes remained locked on his own reflection in the polished surface of his glass. A little sip, a satisfied sigh, and then the change. The glass was placed down abruptly, and his face twisted in confusion. What the? He peered into the glass, as if trying to make sense of what he saw. At first, it seemed like just another mistake. Maybe the bubbles in the champagne had formed into an unusual pattern, or perhaps a piece of something had slipped in unnoticed. But no, there it was. It was a small slip of paper, caught just beneath the champagne surface and nestled beside it, something metallic, something solid. The family fell silent, eyes on him now. No one spoke, unsure of what was going on. Emily watched, her smile now completely absent from her face. She was not concerned. This was the moment. The silence at the table felt like it lasted a lifetime as her father's mind worked to piece together the puzzle. Then, with a sense of disbelief and rising panic, her father fumbled for the contents at the bottom of his glass. He reached down and pulled out the small, delicate piece of paper first, crumpling it between his fingers as he brought it to his face. A second later, he recoiled. The object in his hand was too big to fit into the mouth of the glass easily, but after a second of awkward fumbling, he finally brought it up and out. The room gasped. In his hand was a small key, a metal tag attached to it with a tiny red ribbon. And tucked inside the crumpled piece of paper was a printed sheet with one simple line. Property of Emma Wilson. Her father's face went pale as realization crashed into him. His jaw tightened, his brow furrowing. The silence that followed was oppressive, everyone too stunned to speak. What is this? What the hell is this? He demanded, the first hint of panic in his voice. Emily stood from her chair slowly, no longer hiding her satisfaction. She could see her father's usual self-assuredness faltering, the control he always exerted over his family slipping away in front of his very eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he inspected the key and the paper, his mind racing for any explanation, any justification he could throw at her. I guess you didn't see the deed, did you? Emily's voice was calm, cutting through the tension like a knife. Her words sent a ripple of confusion and curiosity across the table. Everyone's attention was on her now, and she could feel their eyes burning into her back as she turned her gaze to her father. You see, Dad, she continued, her voice steady, that little key in your hand is the key to the house you're currently living in. That deed you're holding, that's the deed to the house that's now in my name. Her father stared at her, his mouth hanging open. His mind scrambled, trying to process what she was saying. What do you mean? Emily smiled, a hint of triumph behind her eyes. I've been planning this for 2 years. I've worked hard for everything I have. Every sacrifice I made, every penny I saved. It was all for me, for my future. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. I've built my life quietly and carefully, and now I'm taking what's mine. And that includes this house. Her father's face twisted in disbelief, shock replacing the confidence that had always defined him. His hands shook as he tried to find the words to fight back, but none came. The room was deathly silent now, no one daring to breathe as Emily's revelation settled in. You see, I didn't just come here for your birthday, Dad. I came here to show you that I'm done being the invisible one, the one who's never enough in your eyes. I'm done playing your little game. The rest of the family sat frozen, unsure of how to react. Her mother's face had drained of color, her brother's smug expression now replaced with a growing unease. But it was her father who was the focal point. He had always seen himself as the one who controlled everything, but now his empire was crumbling. He finally found his voice, but it came out strained. You can't be serious. That house is mine, he shouted, the last vestiges of his authority slipping into desperation. I made you, Emma. You owe me. Emma held her ground, her eyes never leaving his. No, Dad, you don't get to decide that anymore. I owe you nothing, and it's time you learned that. The air between them crackled with tension. The entire family was staring now, waiting for the next move, but no one spoke. Emma had made her statement, and now it was up to her father to respond. The silence was deafening. The room was thick with disbelief, the silence almost suffocating. Her father's shock morphed into rage, the sudden eruption shattering the fragile calm. His hands, still trembling from the shock of the key and the deed, slammed against the table. The clinking of his glass against the surface was drowned out by the anger in his voice. Are you out of your mind? He bellowed, his face contorted in fury. How dare you do this to me? To your family? After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? By taking what's mine. Emily stood her ground, her posture calm and unshaken. The fury in his eyes, the indignation in his voice. It was almost predictable. She had seen this kind of reaction before, when he would berate her for the smallest mistakes or when he'd belittle her accomplishments. But this was different. This was her taking control of her life. Dad, she said softly, the calmness of her voice almost unnerving in the face of his fury. This house was never yours. It was always mine. You just never noticed. Her father's face twisted further, and he shot a glance at her mother, as if pleading for her support. But her mother, standing by the wall, looked too stunned to speak. She had always been the one to play the mediator, the one to try and smooth things over. But now, her gaze was fixed on her husband with an unreadable expression, her lips trembling. Emily could feel the distance between them widening with every word. Her brother, who had been sitting at the far end of the table, suddenly found his voice. This is crazy, Emma. You're being selfish. You've always been so dramatic. What's wrong with just helping Dad out? Why do you have to make everything about you? His voice was desperate, the panic in his tone evident. Dramatic? Emily raised an eyebrow, the edge in her voice sharp as a knife. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being realistic. I've spent my entire life being overlooked, being told that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't matter. And all for what? So that you can keep using me? No, I'm done. Her brother opened his mouth to argue again, but this time Emily didn't let him speak. You don't get to keep using me anymore, she added firmly. None of you do. I've been silent for far too long, but I'm done playing that game. This house, the life I've built, it's mine. You can't take that from me. The room was divided now, the superficial unity that her family had always shown cracking open like a fragile shell. The same family who had presented themselves as perfect, as the ideal unit, was now unraveling before their eyes. Her father's outburst was no longer about the house. It was about losing control, about realizing that he had never truly appreciated what she had given, what he had lost. Why did you even come here, then? Her father hissed, the venom in his words sharp enough to cut. Was this all just for some kind of payback? To rub it in my face? Emily didn't flinch. I didn't come for payback. I came because I was tired of being invisible. I came because I wanted you to see me for the first time in my life. And now that you do, I'm not going anywhere. I've made my peace. The shock in her father's eyes turned into something else. Was it guilt? Or was it just regret? Either way, Emily didn't care. It was too late now. She had taken the power back. Her siblings' reactions were mixed, some sitting in stunned silence, others attempting weakly to defend their father. Her brother shot her a glare, his frustration and anger bubbling over. But even he couldn't find the words to argue anymore. The family that had once prided itself on maintaining a perfect image, a facade of unity, was falling apart. Emily watched as her father's anger turned to confusion, as her brother's attempts to salvage the situation only deepened the rift between them all. She was no longer the child who sat at the table, waiting for a scrap of recognition. Now, she stood at the center of the chaos, a force to be reckoned with. As her family crumbled under the weight of their own lies, Emily knew that this moment, this transformation, was hers alone. The power had shifted. No one could take it back. And she wasn't going to apologize for it. In that moment, the image of the perfect family, the one they had spent so long trying to protect, was shattered forever. The chaos of that night slowly faded into background as Emily sat in her car, watching her family's house shrink into the distance in her rearview mirror. The initial surge of anger and triumph had settled, leaving behind an unexpected sense of calm. She had done it. She had taken back her power in a way she never thought possible. But now, for the first time in years, she felt free. For so long, her identity had been defined by her family's expectations, by their failures, and by her own desperate need to prove herself to people who would never truly see her. But not anymore. That chapter of her life had closed, and Emily was no longer tethered to the ghosts of the past. The facade her family had worked so hard to maintain was shattered beyond repair, and she wasn't going to be a part of it anymore. As she drove further away, she reflected on everything that had led her to this moment. The years of sacrifice, the ignored dreams, the constant feeling of never being enough. She realized that even if she had been invisible in their eyes for all those years, she had always been enough in her own. The real victory wasn't just what she had done at the dinner table. It was the realization that her worth had never depended on anyone else's validation. Emily had finally made the choice to take care of herself. She had spent too many years focused on trying to meet the needs of a family who never cared to meet hers. The constant back and forth, the guilt, the feeling of being forever overlooked, it was exhausting. But now, she had learned that her peace was worth more than their approval. She made her way to the small house she had purchased months ago, the place that had been a secret, a symbol of her newfound independence. The house wasn't anything extravagant, but to her it was a home. It was hers in every sense of the word. It was where she could be herself, where she could heal, and where she could finally live life on her own terms. When Emily stepped inside, she felt a deep sense of relief wash over her. There was no one here to judge her, to tell her she wasn't enough. There was no more pretending, no more bending to fit into a role that had never truly belonged to her. The walls of her new home weren't just a barrier between her and the outside world. They were sanctuary. She had built this life, one that was free of the toxicity that had surrounded her for so long. Emily sat on the couch, her thoughts settling into a quiet calm. For the first time, she felt a deep sense of closure. The revenge she had exacted had given her the space to reclaim herself, but now it was time to let go of the bitterness. She didn't need to carry that weight any longer. The family she had once dreamed of being a part of wasn't the family she had chosen to become. And in letting go, she could finally move forward. She smiled softly, her eyes closing as she leaned back. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in years, Emily felt ready to embrace it. She wasn't the girl who had to prove herself anymore. She was the woman who had learned to stand up for herself,